So, first of all, my question to you is, how easy did you find that analysis? Not easy. Okay.
Looking forward to what you think of it.
Looking forward to what I think about it.
So radio DJ right there.
No, I didn't leave. Are you looking forward to what I'm doing about it? All right. So, while you were busy, I was actually just looking at the reference that was quoted, the Saldana reference on that one slide that I gave. And what I found interesting was what they were saying is required of one in doing this coding exercise. All right, and I wrote them up on the board here. So you need to be organized. All right, so that whole structure of what you're doing comes into it. You need perseverance. Okay, because it's a tough process. Okay, it's not something that comes easily necessarily. Okay, you need to be able to deal with ambiguity. All right, because it's not clear. It's not like numbers, bigger numbers, smaller numbers, negative numbers, whatever. We're dealing with words here that have meanings that are, in some cases, ambiguous. You need flexibility in the sense that you can't necessarily go through it just once and do it and it's done and dusted. You have to revisit it. You have to change things maybe. It's one of the reasons why I showed it to you that third time, is so that to give you the chance of revisiting what you've done. You need to be creative, because you need to actually see what's in the data, and you need to think beyond the words sometimes. You need to actually understand what's behind the words, in a sense. You need to be ethical, because obviously you can put your framework and your value judgments on what's being said. But be very careful, you can't read between the lines, because that's data fabrication. All right? You can only work with the data that is actually there in front of you. And then finally, the last one that they mentioned, and they say probably the most important, and potentially, guys, the most challenging, is that you have got to have an extremely good command of the language. Okay, and I know, and I respect the fact that a lot of you are not first language English speakers. All right. But in order to do this exercise, you actually have to have a very good command of the language. And that is something that you need to just be conscious of if you're going to go into this methodology. So what I want to hear then is, what did you come up with?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Let's say I'm not good in number 7. How, besides the obvious, how may my interview be impaired?
No, it's not so much your interview, it's your analysis.
Oh.
You see, because if you're not familiar with the language and the subtleties and the nuances and the metaphors and the synonyms, all right, then you're not going to easily be able to pick up the themes and do the coding that's necessary. That's the challenge. You might not pick up the relationships when different words are used if you don't fully understand the nuances and the semantics of the words that are used. You see, that's the real challenge. Even if you do a good interview, it's the analysis that'll be compromised more, I think. Okay. All right, so I want to hear from you then, what themes did you come up with? Just any, who would like to give some ideas as to the themes that you came up with that came through out of the interview?
Bonnie?
Always like in politics, this is your ground.
Yeah, actually look at me.
Yes, I'm looking at you.
You wrote a full page.
No, it's not a full page. I think in his response, he was towing upon being very, very fair and somewhat neutral.
Somewhat neutral.
Yeah, somewhat neutral, and acting at the behest of what the movement wants from him. He sang a lot of praise, didn't show any personal character to issues that could arise with the leadership. He also came across as one that has volunteered to get into this
Okay.
role.
Let's just unpack one or two of those at a time rather than, because I think you mentioned a number of them.
Yeah.
Right. So my first question to you is, to what extent are you getting his views as opposed to an ANC view? What was your thoughts about that?
It was very evasive at best to plow his personal views. It was more an ANC agreement or an ANC call-up that he had to agree to as a volunteer of the movement. And I think
to me that was a separate theme. The fact that he was responding to the call-up. I'm more talking about his response to the questions. And really why I wanted to pull that out is that my question to you is, as a group, those of you particularly that are thinking about qualitative research, you're going to be talking to people who generally work for companies and maybe are on boards of directors or management teams. Do you know whether you will be getting an individual perspective, or do you think you're going to be getting an organizational perspective, and will you be able to tell the difference? Anybody? It depends on what.
So if you're interviewing somebody who's like hypothetically is more engaged, they will come more from a company. They'll feel like they're part of the company. Their views will be more aligned to that. But if you interview somebody who's disengaged, it will be more from their views. They won't see themselves as a collective or as part of the company. It will be more of what they think should be happening or what should be done.
Right, now how will you know the difference? As the interviewer and as the researcher now analyzing the data.
Okay, can I just take it back to when we were watching the video?
Okay.
Sometimes your personal biases will overcome you and will overshadow what the person is actually saying to you. So it will also depend from you as a researcher, what angle or what you actually want to get out of that data or the interview. Because you start with the end in.
Fair enough. And remember, with qualitative data, you are part of the data. So that's a given. So subjectivity is unavoidable. But I want to go back to that. How will you know whether a person is giving their own perspective or a company perspective? Yeah.
I think the use of language. So whether referring to
Examples.
the I to be more like their perspective.
Was it using I words?
Yeah.
No, but so often we say ANC.
The ANC, so it's a
the
we,
people.
it's a I, it's the people.
So do you know when they use a word like "we feel this,"
It's
whether
more
that's
collective.
no? But what about the expression, and that's very common in the English language, of the so-called royal we? When we talk about we, when actually we mean I. How will you know the difference is my question.
So he was very indirect in how he was positioning himself, making it seem as a collective, he's with the ANC. So in speaking on behalf of the ANC, there was not much facts, but more about what he's coming to contribute. I think he did a good job of how he's positioning himself within the entire ANC structure, mentioning all the
Right.
committees he was involved in, all the policies that he was involved in writing up. The only positive thing he said, people need to see us as a collective.
Yeah. But again, how either in that situation or in your own interviews would you get beyond this dilemma of individual versus the collective? Whose view are you getting? If you're speaking to the CEO or the CFO or somebody like that, how do you get to know whether it's a kind of collective?
You can't make a decision based on one perspective. So you would have to probably consult different people in different roles or different positions to get.
Potentially, but there are ways, in terms of your questioning, that you can do it. All right? Yeah.
I was going to say you need to probe and direct them towards where you want them to be. You can say, what do you think? So be direct so they know you want their opinion and what.
That's what I'm alluding to, is that you actually need to push beyond the straightforward. And obviously in a situation like we saw there wasn't enough time maybe, or the context wasn't appropriate to probe, but that's the sort of thing that you're going to have to do, is you're going to have to ask questions along the lines of, did everybody agree with that? Or is there any disagreement amongst your colleagues about this? To try and understand whether it is an individual view or not, because it won't necessarily be self-evident. And it's very, very important. I'll get to your question. It's very important when we're doing any sort of data collection and analysis under the broad category of research, is to understand what we call the unit of analysis. Now, what I mean by that is, are you analyzing a company, or are you analyzing the people's perceptions within that company? They're fundamentally different. This applies, by the way, to both qualitative and quantitative. And that's why I'm kind of picking up on this issue, which I think came out very nicely in the interview here. The point is that you can't interview an individual and necessarily get a company perspective. If you're analysing companies, you've got to know whether that perception and the information data you're getting from the individual is theirs or is a company perspective. All right. But you're quite right about getting it from more than one source. That would be triangulation. So if you then interview, let's say, 3 board members and you get a similar perspective, then you can maybe infer from it that it is actually a company strategy or company policy, as the case may be. But it's not straightforward. That's the key issue. You've got to think about it carefully. Yeah.
I mean, on the part of the interviewer as well, I found that he was not probing enough. It was as if he had a gentleman's agreement with the CR prior to interviewing him. The questions were very cordial, even in the way he allowed him to speak, he allowed the vagueness to persist throughout the interview.
Okay, and when you're doing your interviews, if you're doing qualitative interviews for your data collection, what will the relationship be with your participant?
I'm not doing qualitative.
No, I'm saying in principle, what would it be?
No, so
would it not be similar to what we're seeing there?
But I mean, the nature of questions, and it's also prudent to sometimes just interject and ask for clarity in the question or more depth.
Try. Quite nicely sidestepped on occasions. Okay, he did try and lead it, but I mean, obviously Cyril Ramaphosa is very skilled as a politician and was able to sidestep most of those. But no.
So he also answered some questions indirectly. At first he said he's not in government and he's not going to go there. But at a later stage, he said, well, he's part of the ruling party, which is in government, so we are all one and we are one happy family. So I think you would have to really listen to the interview to actually get the essence.
Right. Now
he
that's exactly
contradicts himself.
Thank you. That's exactly the point. And it's not about a one-dimensional, superficial view on this. It actually requires that you drill down into that, both in the interview and after the fact, when you're going through a transcript, if that's the way you're doing it, or going through the tapes again. Right? You can't just take things at face value because there are layers of information that come through in that. So I think you're absolutely spot on with that. You had a comment that you wanted to make as well.
The first one was, when you're doing qualitative interviews, do you have to provide the interviewee with the questionnaire prior to you conducting the interview?
No, you don't have to. Depending on who you're interviewing, they might ask for it. All right, so you might be obliged to present some information about sort of in terms of broad questions.
And that might not affect the data that you...
Well, it would.
Okay.
Remember that qualitative data collection and analysis is a very fluid and sort of poorly defined sort of approach to it. So there's no one way of doing it. Whereas when we're doing a factor analysis, there's kind of one way of doing it largely. All right, it's well defined, it's well structured. Qualitative data analysis by its very nature is not that.
So I presume that is what happens with those kind of interviews, is that the interviewee has to receive the questions. So we don't know to what extent were those answers actually staged or given to him by a PR company. In most cases, they are.
Yeah, we wouldn't know that, but I don't think that's relevant in terms of what we're trying to sort of pull out of it. I mean, I think what we're trying to get out of it are the themes that emerged, whether or not they were prepared answers or not. Because there was probing from time to time.
Well, I think it is relevant because you asked us to analyze what we would think, we perceive his perception to be, or what he's truly saying.
Yes.
The nuances. So I'm saying if those were staged answers, we would regardless of what we thought we heard, they're not his opinion.
Okay. But remember that this whole thing about getting inside people's heads, all right, the filtering that happens. So there's a sense that when we're doing qualitative data that we can drill down, we can get the richness, that we can get inside people's heads. The reality is, whether or not they've got questions in advance, it's not necessarily the case that you can get past that filtering process. All right. So what I'm hearing you saying is that if they've seen the questions in advance, there's maybe going to be more filtering taking place. Is that am I hearing you correctly?
They'll be biased and no truth to the answers.
Why?
Because I believe that you would give the correct answer. Specifically,
in other words, spontaneously they would give the correct answers, or after preparation?
Well, they would have, after preparation. So if I give it to you, whether it's a day or 5 hours before, you would have had time to think through what would be the best answer.
That might mean that I can filter it better.
Okay. And then the second one was...
hang on. That's what I'm trying to get to what you're saying. I can either filter it, or I can get to the answer more accurately. I can reflect on it. The point is, you won't necessarily know as a researcher, as the interviewer, which is which.
Well, yeah, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean I'm sure that that's the case, and that's why you're going to have to. No, it's not about arguing. It's just about actually my reflecting to you that there's certain assumptions that you're going into this process with, potentially, if you're going to do that are going to compromise the data that you're getting out of that process. And it's for the benefit of everybody, all of those of you that have said that you are probably going to do qualitative data collection. You need to understand that.
The second question was with regards to a disengaged employee. That doesn't necessarily mean that that person's views are going to be truthful. He might just over-exaggerate his irritation with the company.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's all sorts of problems with interviews. Yeah. And this is why I'm saying, guys, just understand that there are as many challenges with qualitative data in terms of its reliability, its validity, its analysis, its interpretation, and so on, as there are with quantitative and qualitative. And you've got to apply your mind to whichever approach you follow.
So my actual question is then, with quantitative, you'd be able to model those outliers that are not consistent with what everybody else is saying. With qualitative, you can't necessarily model those kind of nuances. So if someone...
Because by the very nature of qualitative, each data collection is unique. So every one in qualitative is what you're referring to as kind of an outlier.
But how do you pick up those consistent... Because that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to pick up so my question is, are you trying to pick up consistent themes? Or are you just going to lump everything together and give your perspective? Or
No,
what
you're certainly not doing that. You might be looking for... You certainly are going to look for consistent themes, but you're also looking for uniqueness. You're looking for richness. You're looking for the uniqueness of individuals' experiences and of the individual perspectives, of individual contexts, unique contexts. You're looking for all of that. You certainly are not looking to superimpose your own perspectives on it. Okay?
Yeah.
It's unavoidable that will happen to some extent, but that's precisely what you want to avoid. But you certainly are not looking for kind of fitting everybody to a particular pattern or model. Not at all. That's not the process that we're looking at all. With quantitative, we usually can analyze the sample in terms of the overall population. That's what we're intending to do. So sometimes we will find that there are extreme values or outliers that are anomalies to the data. There's no such thing as an anomaly in qualitative data, because every data point is valid in and of itself. It's fundamentally different, you see. Okay. Yeah.
Just to understand, so for qualitative interview, you'll have standard questions, but then you're allowed to add more into your interview, just to profile.
So the way it would typically be is that you start off, when you do your research design, you kind of know what the theory is, and you're going to formulate some questions, probably 6 or 8 questions, if it's a sort of 45-minute or an hour interview, which are opening questions, all right? They're not the data that you want. What you're going to do then is that you're going to, based on the reply to that question, you're going to start drilling down. And you're going to do it on the basis of what you know from the theory. You're going to do it on what you've got from previous interviews as well. So your analysis is happening in real time. As you're doing the interview, you are doing this thematic analysis. Now, yes, you're going to go and do some more of that afterwards as well, but you're actually doing the data analysis in real time as it's coming through. And your next question, all right, is based on the theory and other people and so on. So you might, at your first interview, sort of get a response and say, well, tell me more about that, or when does that happen? Or I've read in the literature that this might be caused by that. All right. Your second interview might then say, how do you feel about such and such a perspective, which you have brought from one of the earlier interviews, which you couldn't bring into your first interview because you hadn't got that yet. So every interview is going to be an evolution of your initial interview guideline, but the basic structure of that interview is still the same. You're still going to cover the same broad questions, not necessarily in the same order, because it might be that that topic leads naturally from, your fourth topic leads naturally from the first question that you ask through conversation. Okay, so you do have to have a starting point, all right, but the actual questions themselves are going to evolve through the research process. Okay, and it's very important that you allow that to happen, because otherwise you're not getting the richness of the data that I was speaking about earlier, which is what you're doing qualitative data collection for, is for that richness. So you want to encourage the uniqueness and that exploration of the data. Okay, right. Any other themes that came up? Because I'm really interested to hear what you what you took away from that interview in terms of the themes. Any other thoughts? There we go. What did we get?
Thanks, Bonnie.
Yeah. You did put him on the spot.
Yeah, I did. I struggled to get a sense of Cyril Ramaphosa in the interview because the interview was about him. So I struggled to get him.
Yeah.
He seemed very comfortable with the idea of being behind the scene. He said that he's always been in politics part-time, and he's a businessman. And then his words were, and I've always been okay with that. And then he said that people kicked him in the position. So you almost get a feeling that he's also not sure. So I think what's his name?
Jeremy Mann.
Yeah, like he wanted to kind of ask him up front, are you in for this or not? And the feeling that I got is that I think he liked the spotlight, and the position, but I don't think he liked what came with it, because now he has to be in the forefront.
All right.
And
okay. I'm going to ask you this not as a challenge, but just because it's something that comes up for me. Are you basing that in data, or is that your inference from it? Are you reading between the lines a bit there?
I probably am. Well, actually, if you listen to his answers, okay, what was the question? I can't remember the question. Okay, maybe I am, but
right.
That's the feeling that I got when he wasn't answering questions about himself. He referred to...
I think you're right about that, but and it's a difficult question to answer, but can you see what the question that I'm asking here is, to what extent is that analysis in the data, or are you actually making an inference and it's not actually in the data? Now you see, if you pick that up in the interview, you can explore that. If you pick it up afterwards, you need to be very careful about kind of superimposing your own view on that, because it may not be in the data itself.
Would I then say I was Jeremy, and then I'm picking that up as I'm interviewing you? Would I then use what Tammy said, just ask a direct question then?
Yeah, by all means. Yeah, if you need clarification on something, if there's ambiguity coming through in the response and you pick it up during the interview, absolutely seek clarity immediately, because you're not going to be able to do it afterwards. You see, you're going to be sitting with that ambiguity later otherwise.
Like is to contract.
I think it was in the data, because he kept on emphasizing on how he didn't choose.
Yeah.
You know,
I agree with you actually, but I just wanted to make. I wanted to check it out.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I do think
I didn't want this. I was very comfortable in business, but the call came in, and whether or not, so you can also probe into. You didn't have to answer the call. Yes, it came in, but you could have declined it. You chose. So that's where I agree with you that yes, he does like the spotlight. However, he wants to make it very clear that in as much as I'm in the spotlight, I can choose to be in the spotlight. The public did.
Yeah, I responded to the call.
Exactly.
I think that there was a strong theme coming through of kind of servant leadership, all right, which would, in the context of kind of our academia, would be important to flesh out, all right, because I do think that came out at a number of places. He was kind of saying this was in response. I served the party.
And indirectly, he's actually trying to say, I'm very successful in what I do, therefore I was called up to do this.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of other indirect messages that you get.
Yeah. To what extent was he kind of self-aggrandizing, in other words, actually promoting himself?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, do you think that was a theme that came out? All right. Now, in the context of the fact that he's just been elected from outside of the political limelight, that would be an interesting theme to explore.
Yeah.
All right, because he's now having to position himself as a politician, where previously he had been seen as a businessman. And so I do think that's a theme that one could explore. Right, lots of comments. You want to follow on with that because there's other questions as well? Go for it.
Okay, I just wanted, the question that you asked me, I think is very significant in the sense that I've always been taught not to ask direct questions when I'm doing an interview, because then the information that you get back, people give you a lot of direct questions and there's a lot of data that you don't get, you know. So I think your question made me kind of like ask myself then, if I ask very, very direct questions, and a person can give you a yes or no answer or a very short answer, isn't it, if I ask you an open-ended question, I could get more than I could?
Absolutely. The reason I said that I can ask a direct question if it was for seeking clarification.
Okay.
That was what I meant.
As a tool.
Correct. As an interviewing tool. All right. Now, what's coming out of that, your question there, is that you actually have to be a really good interviewer to do this job well, to collect the data well. It's not something that comes necessarily automatically. Just because we can have a good conversation with our friends or with work colleagues and that we can operate at senior level in organizations doesn't mean that we can achieve this data collection process. All right. There are skills involved, and this is why we're going through this discussion now and why I've taken you through this exercise. Okay. Right, there were a couple of questions at the back.
Yeah, I just want to know, can you start off from a theme and work backwards? From a theme. When you've got a theme and you go into the interview?
Yes, absolutely.
And then you work backwards, instead of starting off with codes, categories and things.
Yeah, look, your initial questions are probably going to be the ones that I'm saying that you put in your interview schedule, that's going to be in your proposal. Those are going to come out of your literature almost certainly, right? And that's going to guide you in terms of the scope of the conversation. But the detail as to where you're going to take that conversation is going to vary. But no, absolutely you can start off from that point. Yeah.
It's not a question, it's just an observation. I think that when you're interviewing people in an organization, so whether it's a political party or a company or whatever, the more senior the people, the more they're trained to deal with questions and they become very diplomatic about things. You find that people who are more junior will give you sometimes a more real perspective of some of the issues that actually go on. So yeah, sometimes senior people will just gloss over issues because they know how to deal with them.
Yeah, that's something that you've got to be aware of, because you're going to want to interview senior people because they're the influential people. So you have to be very conscious of that. I think you're spot on. I think that is absolutely the case. And you don't get too much more senior than Cyril Ramaphosa at the moment. Well, you do get one more senior, let's put it that way. Yeah.
He's not really senior anyway.
Well, yeah. Well, I haven't talked about the Guptas there, right? Okay. Yeah.
So I think one of the themes, and maybe this is inference on my part, but I kind of picked up that Jeremy was insinuating that this was bound to happen. So even though Cyril Ramaphosa was saying that he didn't choose for this to happen, there was a time when Jeremy said that Cyril Ramaphosa exercised long-term political patience.
Yes.
So even though he's playing it off that he didn't want it, I believe that he believed himself that it was bound to happen. It's something that he wanted to happen. He just had to wait and be patient for that.
I think that's an interesting point you make. I think you're right. It's almost as if Jeremy in his interview schedule had that issue that he wanted to explore, because a couple of questions he was pushing at that a little bit, wasn't he? Yeah. And Cyril was pushing back at that, but he kind of wanted to drill down.
Yeah. That's why I said it was cordial. He was not. I mean, he had an idea of what he wanted to ask, but he never really got to.
Well, I'm hoping your interviews, if you do them, will be cordial as well. All right. Yeah. That's what I'm saying, is that, whilst you can ask direct questions, you're not going to be free to challenge too much. Because remember that what I said a couple of sessions ago. It's about building trust. It's about that relationship. Okay. It's about courting the person like you would a girlfriend. You see, so you have to be very careful of that. I think that's going to happen in any interview situation.
So, just to carry on to my actual question is, would I be inferring, because Cyril Ramaphosa did not say that, but would I be inferring that is what he actually meant? So by him saying that he doesn't want this, that he was chosen to this, it's his duty to the party, he's a servant, all that kind of stuff, with the context of it being something that was bound to happen, is that my opinion? Okay. Or is that what my analysis would have brought up?
So bear in mind, this is only one source of data. All right. So what one could do in that situation is, now in a future interview with somebody else, you could explore, is this something that happens within the senior ranks of the ANC or of political parties? You could look at other other sources, like documentary sources, maybe, as to how the party operates and whether it's consistent with that approach. So I can't answer that on the basis of one interview. You would need to look further, and that's where triangulation comes in.
But with also the data that he shared, I mean, he's been involved in a lot of key structures, such as finance, disciplinary committee, and he's the deputy chair of the NUDP. With Manuel being the chairperson. So, I mean, he's even if he didn't say I want to be in the spotlight, he's almost built his profile.
He has, indeed. So you can use that sort of information as a theme to kind of substantiate something else. And that's exactly what I'm looking for. All right. Now, the fact that you've picked that up but you didn't doesn't matter, in fact. Right? Everybody is going to pick up different things from a given source. That's part of this exercise, is to realize that what you picked up from the themes is not going to be the same as what other people think. And that's totally okay.
That's what I wanted to say. I picked up that he's pushing service delivery for the ANC. So he's showing his credentials to show why he was picked, to show that they want to now seriously deliver on whatever promises they made as a political party.
Right.
And that's what I picked up.
Okay. And that's 100%. I have no problem with that at all. I saw a hand up there.
I was going to say, what Dumi said, there's a level of contradiction in what he says. Because the one moment he says he's been put in that position, and the moment later, when he's asked about his business credentials, he then says, but I've always been in politics, and this is how much I've done in politics. But a moment later, he was saying, I'm half a politician, half a business person.
So those contradictions.
There is a level of contradiction. That's what I when you listen to it.
I think that's really important to pick up. And in the same way that I don't know if any of you looked at any of the body language of the interview, all right? All right? That is part of your data, guys, the body language itself. All right? He was very stiff and controlled throughout the whole process. So he was careful, managing his engagement very, very carefully.
To what extent would you... Okay, so I know I can use that as a guide to say, okay, now I can probe on this because I can see he's clearly uncomfortable with this, and it's probably more... to what extent can I document that?
Fully. Because it is part of the data, as I say. It is absolutely part of the data.
Okay, because no when he was talking about business, you just saw him smile. And because there was the part where Jeremy said, business is very pleased with you. He lit up, you know, and he smiled. And then when he's like, the trade unions are happy with you, and then he goes, you know, I saw a change in the way that
is such rich information.
So I was like,
perfect, beautiful.
He seems to be very connected to business as opposed to the political side of things.
No, absolutely. And if you pick that up, then use it. Absolutely. Yeah.
Tell me about the stiffness.
The stiffness.
Yeah. What does it has to do with the interview? The reason why I ask is because you are interviewing him to get the richness. You know, you want to know what is in his mind.
Yes.
Now, if I'm going to write about his stiffness, for me, it's my own observation. It's my own opinion of what I observed during the interview. What does that have to do with the research?
Okay, it might well talk about the degree of filtering between what he's truly believing and what his actual responses are. There were, certainly at the beginning of the interview, there were long pauses before he answered the questions. That is significant as well, all right? So he was very controlled. He wasn't spontaneous. The first real spontaneity one saw was at the very last moment when he was talking about Rolf May. Okay? His voice changed even. Did you notice that? The tone of his voice changed. And that's important to pick up on. Now, you don't have to draw specific inferences from it, but it's something to take note of in your data, all right, that you can maybe explore, because maybe there's a theme about that. Maybe, and there are 3 interviews of this, by the way. There's 3 parts to this interview. I just showed you the first one. You might find that there are other times when his voice changes, and you know that he's then being more relaxed and letting his guard down a little bit. You see, it's that sort of thing that one would be looking for. You see. Okay.
I was going to say, to Nono's point, especially when you're dealing with executives, certainly in an audit environment where people are trying to hide things and they prepare documents because they know you're coming, the body language is a very important tool that we use to try and see,
exactly.
You know, especially if you're interviewing a couple of executives, you can kind of see the one thing that they're all uncomfortable with, even though they're giving you very well-prepared answers. You kind of see, guys, I think we should look at this provision, because when I asked the FD, he seemed a bit, and then I spoke to the CEO, he also seemed a bit. So the team would then change their direction to that specific thing that he seemed uncomfortable with. So body language, it plays a very important role when people are prepared and they're also very senior.
No, I totally agree with you there.
I agree with that as well, but in terms of Cyril, wouldn't you also say that, you know, he had reason to prevaricate because he didn't want to make public his actual goal of becoming president?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So you can actually behave as though you're uncomfortable, but you
That's
know
fine.
exactly what you want.
As long as you understand that as the interviewer and in analysing the data, you've got to keep that in mind. I mean, I picked up a very strong theme of subordination. Okay, that came through a number of times, essentially subordinate to Zuma, all right, but also to some extent subordinate to the party. But I think that, you know, to differentiate the sort of servant leadership really from the explicit subordination to Zuma, I thought was really interesting. And if you're going to look at the narrative of where we are now compared to where we were then, I think that would be a fascinating thing to unpack.
What I picked up from that was not necessarily the subordination. That was what he was saying, but I picked up a completely different meaning. That
yes,
I'm just here to help. I'm picked out to help.
And how sincere is that, do you think?
Pardon?
How sincere was that, in your opinion?
I think he was just positioning himself, but it's more of what he didn't say that kind of spoke to me versus what he wanted us to hear.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's the unspoken words.
Fair enough. Yes.
Yeah.
But again, you've got to be so careful of that in your interviews, all right? Because exactly the same dynamics as we were observing can happen in your own interviews. That's really what I'm drawing attention to. I think you're right. Yeah, come on.
I also picked up that, to Dumi's point, he was trying to put himself as I'm here to help, because in so many, but not saying, Jeremy said people view you as the savior, and he'd say no, and then put it in his own words that actually I am. But I'm certainly not going to take what the people say. I'm very humble about it, and then actually I am. So
this issue of sincerity is something we often use the word sincerity in terms of qualitative data collection, when in quants we would talk more about validity and reliability. Okay, but I think they really are very, very similar. I want to move on to, and I think we're exploring good stuff here, but did you pick up any of the relationships that I was talking about, the connections that came through in the interview? Did any of you pick up those? Any thoughts on that one? Yeah.
So maybe, well, this is just my opinion. Cause and effect. So the NDP being the means for economic growth. Then another one, means to ends. Cyril. Yes, like what I was saying is Cyril had to be patient for him to be where he is today. And then function, the ANC serves the country, in service of the country.
Right. Okay. Any other thoughts on that one, those relationships? I think they're difficult to pick up, guys, all right? And you might need to explore that explicitly, so to ask for those to come through. And the interview didn't lend itself particularly to that. But I think you need to listen to it a couple of times to start picking up the connections between things. I think there's an issue about the kind of the role of the respective leaders as well. I think that there's kind of a bit of a cause and effect there. I think Jeremy Maggs tried to pick up on the sort of the history behind the fact that deputy presidents have tended to become presidents, but I think that he sort of shut down on that. But you see, those are the connections that we're looking for. Yeah.
I wanted to go back, but I did write a few relationships. So
yep.
I got abilities, part of the experience that he spoke about. And then service delivery in NDP, I saw it as part of the redemption of the whole organization eventually, if they can deliver on that.
So you're saying that NDP would ultimately save the ANC? Is I'm hearing you? Okay, so I think that's a good one, actually. I think that he was alluding to that. I think you picked up on that quite nicely there. Yeah.
I just wanted to find out something going back. Sure. Can you draw a theme that could ultimately be wrong when you look at other sources?
Well, when you say can it be wrong, okay?
There's a lot of people picking up the theme of him saying he didn't really want to do it, but he actually wanted to do it. But then you can look at other sources and realize that until the last hour, they were asking Kgalema to be deputy president.
Right.
So you could have picked up that he didn't really want to do it, but he really wanted it. But you go back and find out that this guy was actually pushing Kgalema until the last hour.
Right.
So can something like that happen, and then you have to change it?
Definitely it can. And that's the whole thing about triangulation. It's about comparing and contrasting. It was on one of my slides there. All right. So that's the whole point about getting to the richness of it, because that's a whole area that you can start exploring as to what was the dynamic that was happening. Why are we hearing one thing in one context and something different in another? That creates the richness that we're talking about. It creates part of the narrative that we're so interested in with qualitative research. Okay, so definitely that can happen. So it doesn't mean to say that the theme is incorrect from what you drew. It just means that they are contrasting and inconsistent themes, and that's always worth exploring, for sure. Any other comments on that?
The rational, or one of the type of relationships that his business success is the reason for venturing into politics. So is he going to also achieve political success? Is he going to rescue the ANC? Is he going to grow the economy?
Where did you get that? Just you can't. Are
one
you?
Of the slides that you.
Yeah, no, but I'm talking about where did you get it from the interview?
Oh, okay. So he mentioned a couple of times that he was quite comfortable in business.
Yeah, he did that.
Right. So and that he was a part-time politician. So
Yes.
venturing into full-time politician, for me, it's almost like he was, he's come in to execute.
Right. Yeah.
And
Okay. I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
Right.
and achieve political success like he has achieved
Okay.
business success.
I like that. Now, you see, one of the things that I'm doing here with a number of you is actually asking you for the specific examples to justify your theme or your relationship. And that's what you've got to do in your reports as well, in your analysis and in your interpretation. So you can't just make a claim, you need to substantiate it. And in some cases, a direct quote or reference to what was said or what was seen in the interview in this case is important to substantiate it. In quantitative analysis, we can make a claim and we can actually quote beta values or p values or correlation coefficients to substantiate our claims. You've got to do the same type of thing in qualitative, because I might not have picked up that theme, but you're eliciting, so being specific about it and explicit about it, I can say, I get it, all right? And now you've substantiated it, and it now becomes for me valid, and it's got some substance to it. So it's not about pages and pages of verbatim quotes. It's about using direct quotations and direct extracts from sources to illustrate and substantiate what your claims and what your analysis says. Okay. Yeah.
I'm sorry. So last time we did fuzzy maps.
Yeah.
So if I'm interviewing a couple of stakeholders, right, or groups of stakeholders, would I then, do all my interviews and kind of like populate my map like that?
You could do it that way. Absolutely. That's definitely one of the ways that we do it, that we do fuzzy cognitive mapping, is to do those interviews and to use the map kind of as my interview guideline.
I see. So then would I have a template of the map before the interview,
Yes.
or do I have to? Okay.
No, almost certainly, because something like a fuzzy cognitive map or any cognitive map, any model that you might be using as the basis of it, it's much easier to have it in front of you and to present it to your participant, to the person you're interviewing, because it immediately creates a focus and enables you to have that conversation. Whereas if you've got to create it from scratch, it's going to take you a lot longer. It's going to take more time.
But then couldn't I maybe do the template of the map incorrectly, and then after I do the interview, I realize actually the relationship is like this, but my map is like that?
Then you've got to be open to that as part of the interview process. You, as you go through the interview, you must make sure that the conversation allows the person to say, well, actually, I think you've got it all wrong. Okay, so you need to be open to that as the interviewer in that case. Okay. All right, just to wrap up then, does anybody want to talk about, give me their narrative, their sort of 30 to 40 word narrative of from what we see there through to where we are today? Kind of how would you connect it with a storyline? Just for illustration, because I think that's often where we want to go. Ultimately, is we want to pick out what the narrative is, that's not immediately evident in the raw data, as in the interview. Does anybody want to offer theirs? Yeah.
I don't have a 40-page or anything, but I think the one thing that stood out for me looking at the interview and then thinking of it now is that right in the interview, Jeremy said you kept the country waiting, you were reluctant, and he spoke about how well he did in business, and he seemed, like Dumi was saying, he seemed unsure. 5 years later, I'm thinking, actually, what impact did you really have? It seemed like you being unsure right from the beginning. We could see it through your.
It has played out. Actually, in some ways.
Very nicely, because I can't actually see what is it that you have done that as a political figure. That whole thing of you being pushed into the position, I can see it now 5 years going on. And then also in the beginning of the interview, he spoke about being pushed in the position. He seemed to be very happy to get the attention of, and when you look at it now, like Theo said, he ran for president he threw his hat in the thing in the 11th hour, which means, again, the craving for the spotlight, you can see it,
Yeah, you see this, for me, from what you're saying, I think that's a very nice thing that you've picked up there. People sort of talk about the fact that he hasn't really put himself forward yet for the presidency of the party, that others have been quite explicit that they're in the race, whereas he's kind of held back. And some people are saying that's tactical, all right, so that he's deliberately waiting for the right moment to kind of step up. But if you look at that, it may in fact be, the narrative may be that he genuinely is reluctant to take on that responsibility.
Didn't you also mention something about being used to working part-time? Now he's going to work full-time.
Yeah, he did say that right at the start. So maybe he's ready to retire. But can you see that there's a narrative there that's consistent with what has happened over the 5-year period? Okay, and that would be interesting to explore that. All right, I'm just one at a time. I'll get to you, Tumi. Yeah.
He says he takes whatever position has been given to him.
Yep.
Right now, he seems to be standing up. From what I'm seeing,
he is starting to.
He's starting to step up and say he's interested in being a president. He's also speaking against the same president that he said earlier we should be viewed as one.
Right. Now that's critical in terms of the narrative. Yes.
So
I agree.
if you look at what he says in the interview, he says we should always be looked at as a collective. There's a theme of unity. Now he's standing up in public spaces and speaking against the same national executive that he's part of.
I agree. I think that's the obvious narrative. And I like that. That's as I said, to me that's sort of self-evident. But I think you picked up a subtle nuance that might, in fact, have some substance as well. All right, you had a comment.
I just want to take you back because before Cyril went into business, he was in line to be president, and that changed his whole perspective in terms of how he viewed himself coming back into politics. Because he made a choice when he wasn't the chosen one then, that I'm going full-time into business. And the second time they called him, that's why he will never come up and say, I'm ready to be president, because he knows he's been there and he's been disappointed before.
Lovely. I love that narrative as well. And this is the point. There's a richness about what you're contributing here, which is absolutely spot on.
I agree with you, Shu, but somewhere along the line, he seemed to have changed his mind. He seemed to be like, actually, this business thing is working for me. Actually, I'm doing quite well for myself. Yeah. Do I really want to go into politics? Yeah. I'm not 100% sure. Maybe in the beginning, before he went into business, he was really into politics, and then business really worked out for him.
Yeah.
And
so one would have to explore that. Yeah. One would have to use other data sources to explore that. All right. I see the hands, but let me leave that.
Just to build on to Sandy's point, I also think he was just, in a way, buying society's confidence in him in a full-time political space by mentioning the various structures that he's been involved in, his business success, him being the deputy chair, correct. Yeah. So it's saying, if you ever doubted me, I am well balanced in the political sphere, I've been an active political member, and I've also achieved business success. Who else is better to fit these shoes than me?
Right. Okay. Just last few comments, because we could literally go on with this all night. Yeah.
Okay, I was going to say I agree with the point that it's all about timing. He had his own personal strategy, if I may call it that, or a journey, and you can see that in his own business, that he's a calculated guy. So he really knew where he was going, because we all have to plan where we're going. It's all tactical.
Fair enough. And you've got evidence to back that up as well. That's not just opinion. You could back that up with other sources. Yeah.
He also spoke about with the NDP that he would go for infrastructure and that it will lead to job creation. So when I look at him now, I don't know if he's achieved those things that he had targeted.
That connection, by the way, is a relationship that one could pick up. NDP, job creation. That I think was quite a clear connection that was there as well. Okay, you've got it.
So I think in summation, we forget that Cyril is a legal mind, and part of what you do as a legal wizard is character assassination if you're going against your person, or character building if you actually
Correct.
Yeah. Therefore, it is in the state of how he speaks, because he's a legal mind. Over and above that, is also a politician, and you learn to polish how you portray a story or a narrative.
Yes, that's right.
So, and that oozed throughout the interview. And I mean, I've heard a lot of commentary around how he was, he waited and then went to business and he was happy. He's always wanted this position. And there was no opportunity that availed itself. Business was an alternative. So when it availed itself, he took it by both hands, but he couldn't, because it's a legal mind, he had to stick to a specific narrative.
Okay, and you'd need to back that up with additional data. Last comment.
So I just want to echo what you said. I do believe that the theme was, let someone else say it. I'm not going to say it. Jacob Zuma is going to prove that he was not the leader that people thought he was when they elected him. And I mean, at the same time that he became the deputy president was the same time of Marikana. So there was just afterwards. So there was some contradiction between him being part of the mines and at the same time he had to make political decisions. So I think there were high hopes for the ANC back then to stabilize the country and grow the country, initiate the NDP, and today nothing has resulted as what we've said. No, it's worse than what it was.
I think that's a political comment. I'm not sure that that's a factual comment. All right. But nothing's happened.
No, what I'm saying is with the targets that have been set to 2030.
Yeah. When last did you hear about the NDP in the press, in the political statements? I can't remember when I last heard politicians referring to it explicitly. Okay. All right.
They changed the name.
All right. It's a detail. It's in a sense a rhetorical question.
Okay. The emerging facts that nothing has really materialized from the NDP. When Cyril Ramaphosa said that he believes in Jacob Zuma as a leader, leading from the front, now it's all about Jacob Zuma. It's his corruption, state capture, all of that kind of stuff. Not really showing.
The corruption narrative was just nowhere there in that interview. Anyway, all right. So I just want to wrap up with a few comments because we could literally carry on with this the whole evening. I think what's come out from me out of this is the richness of a 10-minute interview. All right. So there was a lot of information that came through there, and it's very difficult to know when we've exhausted that analysis. And that's part of the challenge of qualitative data collection again, is when have you exhausted what you've got? You never really know, I guess, when you've fully exhausted it. The other thing is that, yes, you're going to pick up different themes, different people are going to pick up those different themes, but if you again cast your mind back to what we spoke about arguing critically, it's one of the key criteria and evaluation criteria for your project. You need to have the skills of picking up the different themes, all right, and comparing and contrasting those. That's part of the process of doing it. So I thank you for engaging with this. I hope that you've learnt a few techniques. I hope you've got a more realistic view on what qualitative data collection and qualitative data analysis is all about. That it's not just a case of sitting down and chatting and then kind of drawing some conclusions from it. It is a structured process. It's and you have to be able to demonstrate that process. It has to be evident in the results that come out, and I hope that you've got some tools that you can take forward. So thank you for engaging. I found it very interesting having that conversation with you.